Alright, hello everyone, I am Isaac. I'm going to be presenting my final project, which is a Go Fish game using playing cards where you have to get a match of 4 cards. Um, and I just recorded this, it was 30 minutes long, so if it seems like I'm under-explaining or rushing through anything, it is because I don't want it to be that long, because nobody wants to watch that. So I apologize in advance for any of that. Anyway, I'm going to be going over this program. It consists of a few basic parts. I'm going to talk about each of them and then go more in depth. So the first one is this first for loop, which is creating the deck. It's a couple of nested for loops. Then we have our drawing cards, which again is a for loop with if statements. We have our matchmaking, which is different for each player, and then in here we also have close that up. We also have basically this actual game loop, which is a while loop that will continue until these conditions are met or these conditions are met. And it'll switch between player 1 and player 2's turn. And then there's the final matches which are the same as the initial matches and the scoring. So this first part is our deck creation. It's a set of nested for loops, so for x in range 0 to 13, so we're going to create 13 different values, setting them equal to their card values if their card value is not just a number, so ace, jack, queen, king. And then for each of those values, we're going to create four additional values, or four cards split, each one into 4 cards for each suit, and then create the card using this, and add it to the deck list, which is a list of all the cards in the deck, which will come up later. And then also we're adding the value itself equal to each 4 times each, basically, to a deck values list, which is going to be important for matching. So this is just the value, so just the number or the ace, jack, queen, queen, and it's going to match with the indexes of that card in the deck list. Here are my variables, so drawn and draw are going to come up in drawing cards. It's just a way to make sure we're not drawing the same cards over and over again. Turn, that's pretty obvious. And then we have the player 1 variables and the player 2 variables. And those are also going to be explained later, so I'm not going to go into them yet. I'll go into them a little bit. Hand is obviously the hand. Hand 1 values is the same as hand 1, just only the values. Cards in hand I used in the beginning, but I just stopped using at some point because it wasn't working that well. The score, obviously, and then these 3 are just lists that aid in telling the next player what the first player did, or telling player 2 what player 1 did on their turn, which is, important to Go Fish. You need to know what they asked for and stuff, so you know what to ask for. Okay, cool. So here's our first initial drawing cards, and this is obviously the initial dealing of hands, but this basic structure comes up later on when you draw cards also. So for this one, we're going to do a for loop of 0 to 14 because we want 7 cards each. And this is important. This while loop basically makes sure that our number that we've selected is not already in the drawn list. So right now we have drawn set to 100, draw set to 100. So this while loop will trigger. It'll set draw equal to a random number 0 to 51, which correlates with an index in the deck list. And then if that draw is already in the drawn list, it's going to select a new one, so we can't draw the same card twice. Now, this if drawn equals 0, or if drawn index 0 is 100, that's just to get rid of the initial 100. Just, I don't know. It's not necessary, I guess, but I put it in there. So now this is creating an alternating draw, basically, or an alternating deal, sorry, where if the length of hand 2 is less than hand 1, it's going to put the card in hand 2, versus if they're equal, which is the only other option, it's going to put the card in hand 1. So it's just going to go back and forth. So what it's actually doing is it's appending hand 1 with the index of draw, which is 0 to 51, from the deck list. And it's doing the same thing to hand 1 values with the deck values draw. So it's basically creating hand 1 and hand 1 values, which are identical lists, or I guess they're not identical, but one has the cards themselves, the names of the cards, and one has the values. And the indexes are the same for the card name and the value. So if it's ace of spades, it's going to have ace in the hand values. And then cards in hand again. It's important for this initial checking, but then I stop using it. All right, so next, once we have our hands in place, it gives each player a chance to see if they have any matches or to play any matches. So this little input check is just to say, okay, player one's ready for their turn. Make sure player two's not looking if you're playing on the same screen or whatever, anything like that. This while loop I'll talk about in a minute. Basically, how the match loop is going to go is player one says, yes, I have a match, or no, I don't have a match. If they say yes, I'll talk about no first, actually, that'll be less confusing. So if they say no, it's going to break the loop from up here, the while loop, which is why this exists, setting loop equal to false, and print that you don't have any matches, and then they'll be able to continue on. If you input anything else, it's not going to break the while loop. The only way to break the while loop is no. So if this gets input, so if they input not yes or no, it's going to continue the while loop, allowing for a correct input to be put in. And yeah, so this is the only way to break the while loop. You'll see why yes doesn't break it in a moment. So how this works is it gives the player a way to select a card. It's going to print for each card in range 0 to number of cards in hand 1, this is the only place cards in hand is used. After that, I start using the length of hand 1 instead. It's going to print out, but anyway, for each value, it's going to print out. You can press a number, which is equal to the index plus 1. This I3 value is going to be the index, which is 0. Starting out. So it's going to print 1 basically here. So for the first card, it's going to print 1, press 1 for whatever card is at index 0. Then it's going to print press 2 for whatever card is at index 1. So it's just going to 1 through however many cards are in hand, press this for the index that is 1 below that number that you're pressing. Which is why here in our select variable, which is whatever card you want to select, it's going to set it equal to a number, an integer, which is the selected card minus 1, or the selected number minus 1. And then the selected card minus 1, which is going to be the correct index for the card they selected, basically. And it's going to print that selection. And this while loop here is just to make sure they select an actual card that's possible to be selected. So if they select something that's out of range in the index, normally it would just crash the whole thing when it tries to print this statement. But here it's just going to make sure, oh, this isn't in the index. You get another chance to input something that actually is there. So here's how the matches take place. It's going to set the match card equal to the value of the card you selected from hand 1 values. And it's going to create a match list which is equal to hand 1 values, but it's a copy and it is removing the selected card. Otherwise, we're going to look for matches and we're going to hit the selected card and find a match, which, that's not how the game works. Then we have this matches list in the count, which will come up later. So this next for loop basically iterates through the length of match list, checking if each index is equal to the match card. It checks if each index is equal to the match card. If it is, it adds a Y to matches. If it's not equal, then it'll continue on. We'll talk about that later. But for now, if it's equal, it adds Y to matches, and then it will check if matches is equal to 3. So if there's 3 Ys in matches, it's going to say, oh, look, you have all 4. The one selected card plus 3 others in your hand. And then it's going to do this whole for loop here, which is basically to replace your hand with the same hand, but without any of the cards that were matched. So it's going to look through. If it's not one of the cards that equals the match card, it's going to add it to a new list. Then we're going to replace our hand with that new list. I hope that makes sense. So that's what happens if you find the matches. If, on the other hand, the count, which is this variable we have established up here somewhere, here it is, which goes up each time, if the count is equal to the length of the match list, it's going to say, oh, we didn't find enough matches, or you don't have all 4 matches, so it didn't find enough matches within the length of your hand and it's going to ask, okay, you don't have this match, but do you have another one? And it'll still ask if you have another one, even if you did find a match. But this is why it only breaks the for loop on a no, because here, if you don't have any matches, you put no, and it breaks, not the for loop, the while loop, I'm sorry. If you input no, it'll break the while loop now, but if you have another match, you have a chance to put in a second match. So that is our matching system, basically, that we have set up here. Now, this matching system is exactly the same as player 2, except we've replaced all of these values with these values, basically. So now we have our gameplay loop, which is going to be basically exactly the same, with a slight change. This part I'll go over in a moment, but for now, it's just going to be exactly the same as our matching from up here. As you can see here, the only difference is our match list this time is hand 2 rather than hand 1 again. So we select a card from our hand, and it's going to look to see if the other player has that card in their hand instead of seeing if there's any others in our hand, because that's, you're asking, do you have a 3? If they have any 3s, you get their 3s. And then, because of that, we now have to change 2 hands. So if a value in hand 2 values equals the match card, it adds those 2 hand 1 values and hand 1 with the hand 2 and hand 2 values respectively. And then it's going to do that same loop as before, where it removes the matching card from hand 2 and sets hand 2 equal to new hand minus those cards. Yeah, so that's how that works. That's how the asking players for cards works. And then it will again run through, do you have a match? If they don't find a match, I should probably talk about this. It does the same, instead of it just being like, oh, it didn't find a match or whatever, you get to draw a card. That's how Go Fish works. If the count gets equal to that match list length, it will print, they don't have any of these, Go Fish, and then it's this drawing cards thing. This time we don't need a for loop because it's just one card. It tells you what you draw, adds it to your hand, and then turn is set equal to player 2. So this only happens if you don't find a match. If you do, you get to go again. So yeah, and then it does the exact same loop as before, asking if you have any matches. Next, we have player 2's turn. So then here I'll talk about these. Basically, if on player 1's turn they found a match, so if they found all 4 of one card and got a point, it'll say, oh, they found a match with these cards. That's why earlier we had these append match 1, if you noticed them. So here, no, that's not it. Here it is. So okay, this is a found 1, but the same thing happens based on what you're doing. So here we've appended found 1 with the match card if we found a match, basically. So, and then down here, if the length of found 1 is not equal to 0, if we added at least 1 value to it, it's going to print each of those values and say, they took this from you, because this is only happening when they found. If they asked for it and didn't find a match in player 2's hand, then it goes into the asked list, and then it will print, they asked for these. So it's going to tell basically player 2 what happened on player 1's turn. It's going to say they found matches and got points up here. It's going to say they took these cards from you here, and then it's going to say they asked for these cards but didn't find them here. And then it's going to clear all 3 lists. And it's important they only get cleared here rather than on player 1's turn in case player 1 takes multiple turns, which is the same reason these have to be lists instead of variables, because each one can contain multiple values rather than it just being one. And we want to know what happened on each of player 1's turns rather than just on the last turn player 1 had. Besides that, player 2's 2 is exactly the same as player 1, and obviously player 1 has these up here except for player 2. So player 1 and player 2 are both knowing at the beginning of the turn what happened on the last turn that the other player had. And then we have this if statement which breaks with basically the same values as up here. So if there's 0 cards in either player's hand, or if the length of drawn is equal to the length of the deck, so they've drawn all the cards, or if one player scores 7 points, which is over half of the points available in the game, then the game will end. And then it goes to the final scoring. Each player gets 1 extra chance to see if they have any matches, which is exactly the same as the initial matching and the during the turn matching. And then it's going to do this final score here, where it basically prints out what each player had and then checks who won based on who has a higher score. And then there's this last, oh no, not that. There's this last little input to make sure the program doesn't close automatically, and they can just hit enter, the players can hit enter, and the game will end. So yeah, that is the program. Again, I apologize if I rushed through anything. I was trying to make it shorter. It's still longer than I would like, but I still have to do the gameplay, or add the gameplay demo to this. So I will be back in a moment with that. Thank you for watching for now. Alright, so I've pulled up the program running here. I've already done the initial matches. As you can see up here, there are no matches here, no matches here, and so this is the first turn. So basically, if you're playing with someone else, what you can do is just scroll down, and then you can't see the rest. So player 1 would go, they'd hit enter, tells you the score, and then I get to choose what card I want to ask for, so I'm going to ask for a king. So I can press 6, and then it tells me I asked for a king of clubs, and player 2 has a king. Sweet, so it gives me the king of diamonds, which they had in their hand. And then it asks if I have any matches, and I don't, but if I were to input yes, I can select which match I have. So I'm going to say jack, and obviously I don't have all 4 jacks, so it tells me that, and I don't have another match, so no. And since I took player 2's card, I found a match, or I guess using the word match is redundant. Since I found a card from player 2, I can go again. Player 1 can go again. And so I can start my next turn, score is still this, and I can ask for a different card. This time I'm going to ask for an ace. And they do not have any aces, so I drew a card which is the 4 of spades, and that is not a card I already had, so I still don't have any matches. And now it's player 2's turn, so if I was playing with someone else, I would scroll down, and now, okay, player 2, it's your turn. And they would come over, they can't see my cards or anything, and then they go. And it tells them here, player 1 took your king, and then I asked for an ace. Player 1 asked for an ace, but didn't find it. And then they can ask for stuff, they only have 6 cards in hand, so if I were to put in like a 9, it's going to say not a valid selection, and then I can put something in. So this time I ask for a 7 of hearts, and no 7s. And just to show you here too, if I were to input maybe, I don't know, it's going to non-understand end, so I can then put no. That's the while loop running right there. And since player 2 did not find any, did not ask for a card that player 1 had, it's now player 1's turn, and they can press enter, tells player 1 that player 2 asked for a 7, and then they can ask for something. So I just got that 4, maybe I'll ask for a 4. They don't have a 4, I drew a queen. So that's the basic gameplay. I'm going to stop here and get to a point where there's a match and show that. Alright, so I've gotten to a point. I drew a million cards for each player, and that's why this hand looks awful, but I've gotten to a point where I now have all 4 10s in player 1's hand. So we just stole the last one from player 2, and so now I can put yes, I do have a match. And here I have to select. It would be easier if I didn't have so many cards, but the first 10 is here, so that's 7. I can just put that and it'll run through. I have all 4 10s here. And so now it's going to tell me I now have these cards in hand, and you can see, it's probably difficult to see, so maybe you can't, but there's no more 10s in here. It's removed all of the 10s that were these 3 at the bottom and that one there that were in our hand. The score is now player 1, 1, and player 2, 0. And I don't have another match, no, so let's just run through this turn really quickly. And so now it's player 2's turn, and when player 2 hits enter, it's going to say player 1 found a match with 10s. And the score is this, and they took the 10 and asked for a 9 but didn't find any. So that's the whole gameplay. If we ran out of cards at the end, it would stop the game. It would print final turn here, just to let them know it's the last turn, and then print the score as we saw in the code. And that's the whole thing.